Hello and welcome. UVA Speaks is a podcast of Lifetime Learning, a division of the Office of Engagement at the University of Virginia. Lifetime Learning brings the knowledge and expertise of UVA's faculty to the university's alumni, parents, and friends. My name is Susan Lynch, and I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. This podcast features Dr. Kevin Pelphrey, the Harrison Wood Jefferson Scholars Foundation Professor of Neurology in the University of Virginia's Brain Institute. Dr. Pelphrey is a leader in groundbreaking research on autism, using brain science to develop biologically based tools for detecting and tailoring treatments for individuals on the autism spectrum. In this podcast, Dr. Pelphrey will talk to us about autism, the research being done here at UVA, the incidence and misconceptions of autism, and the latest findings of this important research. So thank you, Dr. Pelphrey, for being here today and sharing your research with us.
Sure thing. Thank you, Susan.
So let's start with a broad discussion. So what is autism and why is it important to study autism?
So autism is a fairly common neurodevelopmental disorder. So about 1 in 100 kids meet the diagnosis for autism. And the diagnosis involves looking at the behavior of the kids and their developmental history. And we talk about someone having autism if they have difficulties in social functioning and communication. So the way they interact with other people and their ability to both speak and non-verbally communicate with other people. And we also look for the presence of repetitive behaviors. So things like hand wringing or hand flapping, lining up toys in a sort of an unusual way and being very obsessed with doing that over and over again. And also look when the kids are perhaps a little older for a lot of rigidity in the way they're thinking and the types of things that they think about. And when you kind of see those deficits in social behavior on the one hand and increased repetitive behavior and rigid thinking on the other, you start to think about autism, and you ask about the developmental history and milestones and when the kids did certain important things like notice gestures or start to use gestures to communicate. And you also look at the extent to which the kids make eye contact appropriately, seek out interactions with others. And it's that kind of configuration of things that you're interested in when you're trying to make the diagnosis of autism.
I understand. Okay, so I hear that UVA is making a strong investment in autism research. Can you speak to your work and your work of your colleagues across grounds? It sounds like this is a pan-university initiative.
Yeah, absolutely. So this really started with the what's called the STAR initiative, led by Dr. Micah Mazurek. And what she has built is this really amazing clinical and research infrastructure. And that's she's based in the School of Education and Human Development, but has colleagues and collaborators within developmental pediatrics and within neurology, and I'm based in neurology. And that infrastructure for being able to make autism diagnoses, develop novel treatments for autism, the ability to provide well-known evidence-based interventions, and to support researchers across grounds to be able to actually study autism and contribute to that growing scientific body of evidence is really what that program is all about. And so At this point, we have researchers within data science that are focused on autism research, certainly the School of Education, as I mentioned, School of Medicine, Department of Neuroscience, Neurology, psychiatry, really psychology as well. So there's several cognitive neuroscientists within psychology that have strong research programs that include studying autism as well, like Jamie Morris and Jessica Connolly. So it's really just within practically every school at this point, we have somebody with interest in autism and contributing to this broader mission of trying to understand autism very, very broadly. And the university enabled this to happen both by providing funding for the STAR initiative, but also funding for the Brain Institute, which I'm part of, and then also just by going out and being willing to make hires like mine to bring new faculty to the university that are studying autism and interested in autism.
That's great. It's so wonderful that it's such a broad-based initiative. Can you share the latest science and findings from your particular research?
Oh, sure. Let's see. So the newest work that we've been focused on is looking at sex differences in how autism presents and what might actually be the underlying causes of autism. So we have a National Institutes of Health supported Autism Center for Excellence, and we're the lead site, but this is actually a national network that goes out and collects data on young people with autism. Currently, we're studying adolescents with autism, kind of making the transition to young adulthood. And the reason we're interested in sex differences is that one of the things that you see with autism is a greater likelihood for boys to develop autism versus girls. And that's of interest for a variety of reasons. So it sort of suggests that girls are protected from developing autism. And at the same time, we think that we're missing some girls with autism in terms of our diagnostic ability because they present slightly different. So have kind of a very interesting scientific question there, like why is it that the girls are less likely to develop autism? But also we want to know to what extent are we missing girls, because then they're not getting the interventions that might benefit them. And what we found is that really this difference between boys and girls, it is actually a biological difference in terms of the brain systems that are involved in autism, as well as the genetics that contribute to the development of autism. So really different underlying causes of autism for boys and girls. And that was a big surprise scientifically for us. And it's important practically because it suggests that there might be the need to develop different approaches to intervene for girls versus boys in order to optimize outcomes and optimize their development, just based on knowledge of the fact that there are these underlying different causes. So that gives us a lead into figuring out how to better intervene for each child, and that kind of takes us a step closer to where ultimately we want to be, which is much more of a precision medicine approach, using the neuroscience to actually inform how we intervene and help each individual child And what we've discovered is one of the elements that we need to think about there is whether the child is a boy or a girl. And that on some level can seem, sort of obvious, but we had to really understand the differences in brain development between boys and girls, and the underlying genetic drivers of that development in order to understand what that difference really was. And that in the end will help us to really identify girls who are at risk for developing autism, and in general help many more children with autism than we were able to before.
Great. Can we take a moment and step back, and can you speak to some of the misconceptions of autism? I think that there are many.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the misconceptions have varied over the years. So, one of the biggest misconceptions, which hopefully isn't a common one now, but certainly was for many, many years, is that somehow a style of parenting or a particular thing or set of things a parent does can cause autism, and there's really no scientific evidence for that, and all kinds of scientific evidence that says the opposite. That the theory, unfortunately, it wasn't that long ago. It was really the kind of 50s and 60s. Was that mothers who were cold towards their children and not as responsive as perhaps people thought they should be, were causing autism. And so this theory has been completely disproven. It's just not accurate. But there are certainly sometimes you'll still hear suggestions of this, depending on the kind of science within a given country, or kind of beliefs about parenting and stigma about autism. But in the United States, it's been completely cast aside by modern medicine. So that's one. Another is that vaccines cause autism. This is certainly one that the current events, the recent pandemic and the development of a vaccine has brought back up, not because of anything specific about the COVID-19 vaccine. I want to be clear, there's absolutely no suggestion that might be causing autism. But over the years, there has been various concerns raised about vaccination, the vaccines that kids get early in development, especially for measles, rubella, and mumps. And so that was the result of a paper that was put out by a physician and in a very high profile journal, but it turned out that the paper was completely, it was really fictitious. They made up the data. And so that's been retracted. But that's been a misconception that has stuck, and I still get questions all the time about, how vaccines might cause autism, and do they? And my answer is there's no scientific evidence that vaccines cause autism, and if anything, the science, you can never, the problem in science is that you can never prove what we call the null hypothesis. So you can only gather more and more evidence that something isn't true, and so that misconception is hard to kill because you can just keep stating it as a fact, and then we as scientists have to develop more and more science to say, well, no, actually, this is not the case. And as scientists, we would be just as worried if we thought it were the case as people who are saying it is. So I reassure the audience that vaccines don't cause autism. Let's see, one last misconception. It's maybe a constellation of misconceptions. So a lot of children with autism also have intellectual disabilities. And so maybe at least 60% of kids with autism will have some level of intellectual disability, meaning that their IQs, levels of intelligence, and their ability to adapt to the world and kind of function on their own is affected, in addition to having autism. And so autism itself affects your ability to interact and adapt to the world. But it's not necessarily the case that if you have autism, that you will also have intellectual disability, but often you do. So what that leads to is the idea that of a spectrum of ability within autism, ranging from kids who find it very difficult to interact socially and to communicate their thoughts and actions to others, but who are very, very intelligent and can be particularly gifted and brilliant in one area, one or more areas. Oftentimes it will be their special interest that they're profoundly gifted in, so and those kids make up a proportion of the kids with autism. And then there will be kids of average intelligence who have autism, and then there will be a small majority of kids, so that more than half, who also have some intellectual disability. So the misconception is sometimes it will be that autism gives you some superhuman particular power, which sometimes autism comes with these striking, incredible skills. We call them savant skills, but neurotypical people can have those too. And then, and the misconception that, oh, well, they have autism, then they're never going to be able to live outside of their parents' home or hold a job. And that, for the majority of people with autism, that's not true.
Right. Thank you for that description. So why is it that the incidence of autism is increasing, and what are the factors driving this increase?
Yeah, so several. So talk about incidence. Of course, what we mean is that the number of kids out of all the children born, the number of kids being diagnosed with autism is increasing. So I think at the beginning of the conversation, I said around 1 in 100, really depending on the study and the methodology of the study. Recent estimates put it at 1 in 54, which is pretty shocking. And so there's multiple contributions to this. So the biggest one is the growing awareness of what autism is. So we're getting a lot better at actually picking up on autism. It's sort of like if we didn't screen for vision early in school, there are many kids where we would never know that they need glasses. And so what's happening now is routinely not as routinely as we would like, but not universally, but routinely, pediatricians screen for autism using brief checklists, and also just from our efforts to get out in the community and give lectures, and physicians get continuing credit for attending these lectures. And so then when they see a child with autism, they're much more likely to recognize what they're seeing and then refer to a specialist. So that's a major element of it.
Mm-hmm.
A second part is that in the late 80s, early 80s, really the first effort to formalize the diagnosis of autism happened. And that formalization is in what we doctors call the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. So it's our go-to book for defining all possible conditions that you might encounter. And it was that early 80s edition that first defined it. And even though autism was kind of discovered and defined in the 40s, it took that long to kind of formalize a true diagnostic definition. And that one was fairly narrow in terms of what one would call autism. And it really captured the kids who also had intellectual disability. And then over time, that's been revised to be broader, so that we're much more aware now in the medical and scientific communities that autism is a much broader thing, that it isn't only the kids who have intellectual disability and can't or don't speak. It's also the kids who have fairly subtle social difficulties, but difficulties nonetheless, and more subtle repetitive behaviors and thoughts, but still provide or get in the way of their daily living and flourishing. So that expansion of the definition has really also driven the increase in the incidence, meaning the diagnosis of autism. So from what we can tell, those two factors, kind of the broadening of the definition and the increase in the ascertainment of autism, the recognition of it, the awareness, have driven those numbers higher. There's still, I've mentioned genetics several times, and I should have said at the outset that autism is highly heritable. And what that means is that it runs in families. And if you have a sibling with autism, you yourself are much more likely to develop autism. And so that's led to us really strongly looking at, what are the genetics of autism and what are the genes driving autism. A lot of progress has been made in that area. So that's part of the increase in autism as well.
Very interesting. So lastly, for those who are listening, who might have a child or a family member on the autism spectrum, can you speak to some of the interventions that a family might consider?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So you obviously want to look for things that have some evidence base. And so by evidence base, what we mean is that they've been studied with randomized controlled trials that have shown that they're effective and they don't hurt any of the participants, and that they improve in a statistically significant way as compared to another intervention or compared to a wait list control or something like that. So those are important words to kind of listen for when you're considering an intervention. But the types of interventions that we have available for, especially for younger kids and more severely impacted kids, different sorts of behavioral interventions that fall under the kind of broad category of applied behavior analysis are evidence-based and have been implemented successfully, and they certainly help some kids quite a bit. They don't help everyone, and no intervention does. That's why we want to get to a much stronger place of precision medicine. But they benefit some kids, and most kids they benefit a little bit, and some kids they benefit a lot from that type of intervention. And that's a family of interventions. At one point there was one thing called applied behavior analysis, but now you'll hear terms like pivotal response treatment. You'll hear the Denver model of behavioral intervention. Those are two. Another is called Jasper. That was one that was developed at UCLA. They're all similar. They have subtle differences and might work differently for different kids because of those subtle differences. But they have more similarities than differences. And they're all evidence-based in the sense that the important kind of randomized control studies have occurred. So that, for kids in the age range of about, say 2 years old to about 6 or 7, 8 years old, those are the types of interventions for which we have a good evidence base. Past that age range and kind of overlapping a little bit with the upper end of that age range, different social skills models and social skills training models have been very successful. One in particular is called the Peers model. It was also developed at UCLA. That's something that we're actively studying here at the University of Virginia. We're very interested in using our brain imaging techniques to predict which treatments will work for which kids to kind of get to this precision medicine approach. But that's those types of social skills where a small group of children will or young people, because with those types of programs, they can be particularly good for adolescents and young adults as well. They'll get together and they'll have a leader, kind of a coach that is working with them through different ideas and exposing them to different settings and letting them try out different skills. And so that has been a particularly effective approach. Let's see. And then cognitive behavioral therapy or therapies would be the other kind of large area that has shown evidence-based. So for example, many kids with autism also have significant anxiety, and that makes a lot of sense. And if you find social interactions very difficult, they can be very anxiety provoking, and you can get into this kind of negative feedback loop where you get more and more anxious about all of these people around you that you don't really understand and can't control, and it's very anxiety provoking. So cognitive behavioral therapy is something you do usually one-on-one with a therapist, where you work through different ideas that you have about the world, and think through different scenarios, and it will help you learn different ways to cope and adapt, how you're interacting with the world. And so that's another set of evidence-based, people will say cognitive behavioral therapy, and it can go, by other names as well. But that's really another family of therapies that have evidence backing them up. So those are three. And then, of course, people will ask about medications. There's no medication for autism right now. And my personal point of view is that we will develop medications that help with certain aspects of autism, but there will never be a pill that just, oh, you have autism, take this. What will likely be the important advances will be that there will be some medications that, when given in combination with those evidence-based interventions that I mentioned, will help the brain to better learn in the context of those interventions. And that will help children with autism and young people with autism to improve in terms of reducing autism symptoms and living richer, fuller lives that are more self-directed. But right now, there's not any medications that are approved to treat autism, but oftentimes people with autism will be taking medications that are helping with some of the associated symptoms like anxiety and irritability. So a lot of times it can be beneficial to a family to search out a psychiatrist or a neurologist or a primary care physician if they're comfortable with, and they know a lot about autism, to look for medications that might help with some of those symptoms. And actually that raises an important point that I hadn't mentioned before, which is that autism almost never appears alone. There are many associated medical conditions that people are more at risk for if they have autism. And one of the really big ones is epilepsy. And so we think that one of the things that's happening in the brain in autism that increases risk for autism is an instability of excitation and inhibition in the brain. And that this also is related to the development of seizures. And so a fairly significant proportion of people with autism will develop seizures either early in development and have seizures that can hopefully be controlled in consultation with the neurologist with medication. And that will happen either early in development, and then the other big time period to really be on the lookout for potential seizures is adolescence and puberty. That something about the reorganization of the adolescent brain opens the brain back up to being at risk for seizures again. So you'll see another spike in the number of cases of epilepsy within adolescents with autism as well. And for now, thankfully for epilepsy, lots of medications have been developed and approaches that have been very successful for treating epilepsy. That's an area of brain science that I think we've made major achievements. And at UVA, I think we have some of the very best scientists in the world who have developed those interventions, like Jajit Kapoor is one, Howard Goodkin, the Department of Neurology. So I'm really proud of the kind of leadership in epilepsy. that we have here at UVA. And that's something for families to be aware of if they have a person on the spectrum in their lives, because as I mentioned, usually you either see those seizures, from the start, or you can be surprised in adolescence with the emergence of seizures.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pelphrey, for sharing your knowledge and your expertise. You've certainly given all of us many things to think about. As I mentioned to you prior to the recording, this is an issue that has impacted my family. And so it's so great to hear about the research being done here at UVA to seek to understand the issue further. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
And I want to thank everybody for listening. For upcoming podcasts and other Lifetime Learning programming, recordings, and blogs, please visit our website at alumni.virginia.edu/learn.